Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June 18th Florida Housing Board meeting. Boy, it's nice to see people. Were you all on the phone? Wow,
Nice.
it's amazing.
It's nice to see Marissa smile. That's it.
She's always
I
smiling.
know, but you couldn't tell before.
All right, I'd like to go ahead and call our meeting to order. Sheila, can you please call roll?
I'm over here, Ron.
Oh, there, where are you?
Is this
Oh,
on?
my God,
Ron Lieberman,
I'm here.
Latasha Green Cobb,
Present.
Ryan Benson, Sandra Einhorn, Mario Ficella,
Here.
Bill Gulliford,
Here?
Dev Matwani,
Here.
Holly Rashine, and Dane Eagle.
Here.
Thank you. Just a reminder that we have a brand-new court reporter. Please speak clearly, loudly. The Florida Housing People and Board don't need to identify themselves because they have nameplates, but anybody else speaking, please identify yourself before you speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Any public comment on anything that's on the agenda? Does anybody have anything? Okay, seeing none, let's move on. I need a motion on the minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Oh, I don't have to call on Sheila. Thank you. Florida Housing Finance Corporation status update. Trey.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Trey Price, Executive Director here at Florida Housing Finance Corporation. It is wonderful to see everyone at our first meeting post-pandemic. I want to thank the City of Tallahassee for their hospitality and going back to our normal meeting format. And to come up and say a few words, we're honored to have the Honorable John Daly, my friend, the Mayor of Tallahassee. Please join us, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Executive Director, it's great to see y'all here. My name is John Daly. I'm the proud mayor of the city of Tallahassee, and I want to officially welcome you to the chambers. First of all, it is so great to see so many happy people in chambers. It's and you just said history, Mr. Chairman. No public comment. I don't think that's ever happened in this chamber before, so congratulations. First of all, let me apologize for my dress. I am actually splitting time between Cub Scout camp out at McClay Gardens, and I just came down this morning to say hi. So I'm usually not this casual, but I wanted to make sure to come and welcome y'all. For all my friends that live here in Tallahassee, it's great to see you. And for everybody that has traveled to Tallahassee, welcome back to your capital city. I always laugh and say, wherever you're from, you have a mayor and a commission down there, but we are your capital city, and I am your capital city mayor. And while you are in Tallahassee, if there is anything that we can do to make your stay more enjoyable, we'll be more than happy to do it. These chambers are your chambers. Anything that we can do to make you more welcome and have a good meeting, we'll be more than happy to do so. You all have access to these chambers anytime you would like. Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy your meeting. I hope it's a great one, and thanks for giving me the chance to say hi.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Great to see you. Mr. Chairman, a quick status update. As the board members are probably aware, we have set the remainder of our meetings outside of Tallahassee. Some of us are pretty anxious to get on the road. As much as we love our hometown, Mr. Mayor, he gets it. We are anxious to get on the road. We will be attending our board retreat on July 29th at the Orlando International Airport Hyatt, and we plan to start that meeting at 10 a.m. on that Thursday morning. Then we'll have our board meeting the following morning at 8:30 a.m. at the hotel in the airport. Our next meeting after that will be in St. Petersburg, in downtown St. Petersburg. I believe that's September 10th, and we'll have that at the hotel. I believe it's a Hyatt as well, downtown at 8:30 a.m. Then we'll be in Panama City in mid-October, and pretty much the same format. We'll be at a hotel there, and that will coincide likely with the 3-year anniversary, unfortunate anniversary of Hurricane Michael. We'll plan to probably spend the day prior touring some of the sites and looking at the cleanup that has happened in Panama City. And then hopefully we'll have a chance to meet with the state CFO as well, as his family lives in Panama City. So then our December meeting will be back at the Orlando International Airport Hyatt for our early December meeting with the same format. So just wanted to give everyone a status update on that. And then also, I hope you got a chance to see, I'm not sure if the external affairs folks are going to mention this. As you came in this morning, we had an art contest, a statewide art contest, and we had the 40 winners announced from around the state of Florida, and we had those shown leading up to the meeting start. So I hope you got a chance to see those, and many of those are featured prominently throughout our building in our offices at Florida Housing. So enjoy those, and we were very proud of the effort that students from around the state put in for those. So appreciate their help. And that is my update, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Trey. Taylor? Are we talking about the art contest?
I might have stolen some thunder, so I apologize if I did.
I'm going to let Stephanie go first, Chair, if that's okay.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see everyone. Very quickly, the last meeting, I gave a legislative update, and since then, I just wanted to share some information on our financial status. So initially, there were going to be $362 million in sweeps from our trust funds, and the governor chose to veto one of those sweeps, which means $40 million is going to sit in the State Housing Trust Fund, and it did not get swept. So those are resources that are now in our trust fund, and if we could get spending authority, it would be amazing. Anybody wants to help with that? That was my very quick update. Excuse me?
I didn't hear you what you said.
$40 million is sitting in the State Housing Trust Fund, which is the SAIL program.
Yeah, that was after that. I didn't hear.
Oh, if anybody would like to help get us some spending authority to use those resources, that would be
part is what I was
fantastic.
looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, we'll be in touch with the governor's office and with Office of Policy and Budget, as well as the legislature, to see if there's any appetite for appropriating the $40 million outside of the regular session. Only the legislature has the power to appropriate funds, as we know from our civics classes. So we'll see what kind of appetite that is. Other than that, we'll see if it just moves forward to the next budget year. As folks may recall, with it being an even-numbered year next year, the legislature will be in session in mid-January through mid-March, and they also have reapportionment to deal with. So, so that's what will be on the plate. And thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And now Taylor's going to talk about our contest.
And I'd like to mention that with the increase in cost that all of you have, and myself as a builder, we'll actually be doing less projects because of those increases. So everybody should know that.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Lieberman, board members, Taylor Maxey, press secretary. Since the beginning of the year, the External Affairs Office, with the assistance of Bow Stern, began planning the implementation of the relaunch of our statewide art contest. I believe the first one was in early 2000s. The contest launched in April, and we invited kids and teens between the ages of 5 and 18 to submit their vision on our theme, What Does Home Mean to You? The contest aimed to increase awareness on the importance of having a home by encouraging kids across the state to use their imagination to illustrate the meaning of what home truly means to them. By early May, we received hundreds of submissions, really good submissions, and by the end of May, we selected the top 40. As Trey said, they are prominently displayed on our 5th, 6th, and 7th floor in our corporate office, as well as on our website at floridahousing.org/art contests, on our social media platforms, and as well on the screens before the meeting started this morning. As it pertains to media results from the art contest, we received over 15 media placements and nearly 4 million media impressions just from the art contest alone. Moving on, there are other things, of course, that External Affairs is working on as we continue our mission of generating awareness of Florida Housing, our resources, and what we offer. We still have our media relations and marketing outreach, both nationally and statewide, that is ongoing. As such, in July, our Chairman Lieberman, as well as the Directors of Homeownership and Multifamily, will be teaching a workshop at the Southeast Building Conference in Orlando. And External Affairs staff will be attending the Florida League of Cities Conference in August as well in Orlando. Before I conclude my report, going back to the art contest, I would like to share 2 news stories that really hit home. We shared them internally with staff, but we would also like to share here at the board meeting. One was from Spectrum News 13 in Central Florida. The other was from WPTV in Palm Beach, and these were 2 art contest winners.
For 8-year-old Emil Hall, learning from home this last year during the pandemic has been a challenge.
It's like kind of hard to know how to control the computer, like when the internet's not working.
But on the other hand, being at home so much more has had its perks too.
I was able to spend more time with my animals. Our goats were able to get more used to us.
Emil may have been learning from afar this year, but her art teacher at Narcoossee Elementary School found a creative way to keep her engaged.
My digital students and my face-to-face students needed opportunities to really express what they were going through.
Emil's teacher invited her to submit artwork to a statewide competition for kids organized by the Florida Housing Finance Corporation. Contestants responded to the question, "What does home mean to you?"
What home means to me is where I could stay at my house during COVID and do a ton of stuff with my family, be able to bond with my family. And then here's my goat head right here. There's my goats.
Those goats and chickens, a welcome comfort during the last year for this young animal lover who dreams of one day being an art teacher herself.
I love art so much because it's just where my calm place is.
This year has been tough on our students. Their emotions are very important this year.
But Floramonte says her students have found art making to be very therapeutic.
They get into their painting and they lose themselves. They just thoroughly enjoy. It's quiet, it's calm, they're focused.
Emil plans to return to in-person learning next fall.
Really excited and happy that I'm gonna go back.
Yet this extra time with her family and her beloved animals has helped Emil appreciate the stability of her family's home in a whole new way. In St. Cloud, Molly Durig, Spectrum News 13.
And we have one more.
All right, what does home mean to you? It can be a complicated question right now. It's a question posed to children all over Florida.
And they were challenged to share their answers through their art. I met one local entrant who says the project opened her eyes in a whole new way. This table and these art supplies are a place of contemplation for 14-year-old Kaylee Aguas.
I look like back 4 months ago, and my art was like completely different than what it is now.
An art student at Bach Middle School, she usually focuses on portraits, but a statewide contest by Florida Housing pushed her to answer the theme, what does home mean to you?
I use the house as a metaphor, so I like walls of strength, a roof of safety. It's made with love.
During the pandemic, her sense of home has changed dramatically. Breakups spiked around the world, and this family's not alone. Kaylee's parents split in the fall.
It's sad, but it's also a closed door that opens into a new beginning.
As Kaylee divided her time between her parents' new homes, she looked beyond the bricks and mortar and home improvements.
A home and a house have 2 completely different meanings.
The life adjustments developed with her art.
It's definitely not the best piece that I've made, but I think the meaning behind it is better than any other piece of art that I've created.
So much so, in her next piece, her final portrait of middle school, she looked again to the symbolism of her surroundings and the power of what's within.
A home is made with love and is protected by love.
So we would like actually to congratulate Kaylee this morning. She was just announced as one of the top 40 winners by Florida Housing. Pretty awesome. Way to go. And here's some of the other submissions. More than 200 children participated statewide. The winning work is now in an online gallery. The link to see it is on WPTV.com. Some really talented artists across our area. Incredible stuff.
We're always in tune with those contestants, those contests.
Yeah.
Love that story right
done.
there. And inspiring as well. Good artwork. Gonna
Thank
check
you,
that out
Lord.
later.
This concludes my report. Please let me know if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Okay, Latasha, please present the Audit Committee update.
The Audit Committee met yesterday, Thursday, June 17, at 4 p.m. with members participating via phone and in person. Mike Patillo from Ernst & Young presented the results of the 2020 financial statement audit to the committee. The audit had an unmodified opinion on both the financial statements and the schedule of federal awards. Additionally, there were also no management letter comments. Once the board accepts these financials, staff will post them to the Florida Housing's website. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that the board accept the audited 2020 financial statements.
Okay, I have a motion. We have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous? Okay. Thank you, Latasha. Next, we need the approval of the items on the consent agenda. Trey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have not received any word from any board members to pull any items from the consent agenda, but I will for this one last time before we move the consent agenda. If there are any items, please let us know now.
I see none. Okay, can I have a motion on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Boy, it's nice to get a voice vote. Let's go. Angie,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
we have money.
We're going to talk about money.
Okay.
The purpose of this item is to allocate the funds from the 21-22 state budget. The legislature appropriated $209.2 million to Florida Housing. Of this, $146.7 million was to the SHIP program, with proviso to use $563,600 of that appropriation for the Catalyst program. The remainder, $62.5 million, was from the State Housing Trust Fund. In some years, there's proviso language directing on how that appropriation is to be spent, but other years there isn't. This year, there was no proviso. So it falls to the board to determine which programs to allocate these funds to. In your board package, Exhibit A is a chart with the historical allocation of funds appropriated to Florida Housing. The board has been able to decide some of those allocations, but others, of course, have been specified by the legislature. After internal discussions, staff has settled on the following splits to recommend to you. Allocate $335,000 for the Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse. As a reminder, the Clearinghouse provides a free web-based portal for data and reports on demographics, housing need, and supply at the state and local level across Florida. It's housed at the University of Florida, and we contract with them annually for these services. Florida Housing frequently uses their data to assist in decision-making, and we rely on their staff to run special reports. We also recommend that you allocate $62,165,000, or whatever remains after funding the Clearinghouse, to the SAIL program. Marissa will go over the SAIL funding, assuming you approve this item, later in the agenda. So our official recommendation is, staff recommends that the board approve the allocation of the fiscal year 2021-2022 appropriation from the State Housing Trust Fund as follows. For the Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse, up to $335,000, with any funds not used for the Data Clearinghouse going to the SAIL program. And for the SAIL program, $62,165,000, or the remaining appropriation available after funding the Data Clearinghouse.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion on staff recommendation?
Move to staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Hugh Brown, can you present legal item A?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. We have 3 items on the agenda today. The first one is the case of Arthur Mays Village Phase 1 versus Florida Housing Finance Corporation with intervener MHP FL1, case number 2021-005 BP. This case arises from RFA 2020-203 for housing credit financing in Miami-Dade County. 3 applicants, including MHP, were found eligible for funding. Arthur Mays was found eligible but was not selected for funding. Arthur Mays challenged this result, filing a petition which was forwarded to the Division of Administrative Hearings. Hearing was held in March, where Arthur Mays argued that MHP should be ineligible because one of its applicant principals was not registered to do business in the state of Florida at the time of application, and because MHP had allegedly misrepresented the cost of the development site. Following the hearing, the administrative law judge issued an order recommending that MHP be found eligible and to recommending the dismissal of the Arthur Mays petition. No exceptions have been filed in this case. Staff recommendation is that the board adopt the recommended order, its findings of facts and conclusions of law as its final order.
Hey, can I have a motion on legal item A?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'd like to
sir.
say a few words. So when I read through this case, although it's pretty clear that there's not a misrepresentation as the Arthur Mays challenged as part of this case, but there was something of concern. So McDowell Acquisitions, which contracted the property to the applicant. So McDowell bought or contracted the property on October 22nd, 2020, and then turned around. It was 2 lots, took one of those lots, sold it to this applicant for double the price, which, caused a little bit of red flag in my mind. And then as I went through the case, discovered that it really wasn't, an arm's length transaction, that McDowell is actually the CEO of the applicant. So, again, not misrepresentation, because the seller can sell the property for, whatever they want. But this really brought up really more of a policy concern to me, in terms of the length of time of which this transaction was taking place at an elevated price, and how that flows through to the application, to the amount of tax credits, et cetera. I did have a conversation with staff a couple days ago. I do understand that there are some protections in place through the application process, and I just wondered if Marissa could just, just explain those to the board of how, my concern of the double the price and the fact that this may have added, had a resulting in the gap calculation that may, provide the credits at a higher level.
Marissa?
Thank you. I'm just consulting with legal to inquire whether a vote needs to be made before I answer the question.
I'm not, by the way, I'm not challenging the rule, and the verdict of what the judge has concluded, because, the charge is based on misrepresentation. I don't think there's misrepresentation here. This is more, in my mind, a policy issue.
Should we vote first?
Well, you're in the discussion phase. Board Member Facella is conducting discussion. If he's fine with that, I think we should go ahead and proceed with a vote and then continue discussing it if you like.
Okay, that's fine. I'm okay with that.
Great, then. Okay.
I guess we need to see if there's any other discussion and then call for a vote.
Any other discussion?
Real quickly, I understand your concern. I think that points to the meeting that we're going to have, the session, that we can get into discussion of policy, because there are a number of things that, and that might be a real appropriate time to get an in-depth discussion of exactly what you're talking about. If that's okay with you.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah,
you.
And just for the edification of anyone in the audience who wonders about this, the board is restricted to the record of the case. So if you want to have policy discussions, it's perfectly fine, but probably should happen after the vote.
All right, I have a motion and a second. No further discussion? Seeing none? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. You, legal item B.
We thought we were going to finish the discussion, or did we say we're not going to finish the discussion?
She's asking to finish the discussion on this particular legal item.
And I'm happy to answer the pending
Okay.
question and then
Right.
wrap it up tightly to move on if that's okay.
Sure.
With the thought in mind, to Mr. Golford's point, that we can talk about this further at the retreat as well. I think the question that Mr. Fratello raised about the representations in the application and at what point in time that is reviewed with regard to the amount of housing credit allocation that's recommended to an applicant. That was in some ways what the issue was in the cases the record reflects. And as the record in that case also reflected, what was reviewed at application with regard to cost of land for purposes of pro forma, it's really not reviewed at that point in time for that calculation. So the many applicants come in with to demonstrate site control of their development site through having a deed or certificate of title, or having a lease, or in some cases having an eligible contract, like an option contract to purchase. So that is separate. They demonstrate the documentation that they have potentially to purchase the land, and then information may flow over to the development cost pro forma. And in this case, there was cost of land in the development cost pro forma as an ineligible housing credit cost, because the cost of land is ineligible in terms of eligible basis. We have a three-part, in our rule, codified, three-part analysis where we look at the ultimate amount of housing credits that are allocated, and that is through the eligible basis calculation, through it's a lesser of three, the lesser of that, the lesser of the amount that's requested at application, or through the gap calculation itself, where there is a component of the value of land, which is different as you looked at the information you had in the item from the cost of land itself, because once an application is invited to enter credit underwriting, they have to go through an independent third-party appraisal. So we have very much a controlled process to look through that and review what is appropriate, particularly in terms of whether there is an arm's length transaction in a land purchase scenario. So briefly, I leave it at that high level to say, once an application is invited to credit underwriter, there continues to be levels of controls at the underwriting process and even through the cost certification process as to the amount of credits that are going to be allocated. Thank you.
And I'll just say that, because it's very likely I won't be at the retreat because I'll be out of the country, but I'll just say from the banking perspective, and what kind of flagged this when I was reading it, is that in banking, if I'm considering a loan to build a multifamily property, a lot of the times the equity, or a big part of the equity, is the land. So we're looking at the land basis, okay? So there was a lot of trouble that occurred, like in the S&L time in the early 90s, et cetera, where you were getting inflated land costs on either non-arm's length transactions or just elevated appraisals at that time. So in banking, the way we consider it is that you have to own the property, at least at TD Bank, and Bank of America was there as well. You have to own the property 3 years in order to have an increased market value in the property. So this in this particular example, it's 30 days, that the contract flipped. And so, anyway, that's kind of where I was coming from on this. And, I just wanted the board to kind of, understand my perspective on that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Vitale, and those are things that we'll continue to discuss and consider in terms of the policy of how we look at analyzing those.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's move on to item B.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Second item I have for you today is the consolidated case of HTG Astoria, MHP FL8, and Vista at Coconut Palm versus Florida Housing, and various interveners as listed in your materials. I promise this case is easier than it looks. It is, I actually want to take a second to say this is actually a great example of how our cases often start out quite hairy and complicated, and in the end up being quite simple and straightforward. And I think that is a testament to the attorneys and the parties on all sides and their professionalism and industry in getting these things done as quickly as possible. That being said, this consolidated case arises from RFA 2020-205, providing state apartment incentive loan program funding with 4% tax credits and bonds. I believe this is a statewide RFA. 17 applicants were preliminarily selected for funding, including the litigants in this case, Willows, SoMe Park, Douglas Gardens, Quiet Meadows. Unfunded applications involved in the case include HTG Astoria, MHP, and Vista, and Tallman Pines was involved in the case as an ineligible application. HTG Astoria, MHP, and Tallman Pines, and Douglas Gardens, and Vista all filed petitions challenging these results, but Tallman Pines and Douglas Gardens voluntarily dismissed their petitions early in the process. The HTG Astoria, MHP, and Vista petitions were then forwarded to the Division of Administrative Hearings and consolidated for hearing. Prior to the hearing, the parties agreed to several stipulations which resulted in Willows, SoMe, Douglas Gardens, Quiet Meadows, and MHP all agreeing that they were ineligible for funding. A hearing was held at the end of March to resolve the only remaining disputed issue, whether University Station, as alleged by Vista, should be ineligible for failure to include a lease for one of its scattered sites. Florida Housing and University Station argued at hearing that they met the requirements, the documentation met the requirements of the RFA. The ALJ agreed and issued an order in May recommending that University Station application be found eligible and to dismiss the Vista petition. The ALJ also recommended the Douglas Gardens, MHP, Quiet Meadows, Willows, and SoMe applications be found ineligible as they had stipulated. Vista has filed exceptions in this case to which University and Station and Florida Housing have responded. These exceptions in the record of the case have been provided to the board for your review. Due to the number of applications involved, we have also included a spreadsheet that will show the outcome should you follow staff recommendation. Staff recommendation is to adopt the recommended order, findings of fact and the conclusions of law of the recommended order as your final order without changes. With that, I believe the parties are here to argue about the exceptions.
Okay, have a motion to staff recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second? Okay, so we'll, yes.
We're going to have discussion, and Mr. Chairman, I would recommend 5 minutes to each side be allocated.
Just to be clear, is motion staff recommendation? Is that
Yes.
the pending motion? Okay, thank you.
It is.
Good morning. It's nice to be back in person. I'm Ken Naylor with Atlantic Pacific on behalf of Vista at Coconut Palm. Appreciate the opportunity to address the board this morning. Site control is central to Florida Housing's process, which is why you require applicants to show that they already possess or have the legal right to possess their site in one of three ways. Option one is a deed. Deeds show that the site has already been conveyed to the applicant. Option two is a ground lease. Like deeds, ground leases also convey the site to the applicant, but for a period of time, in this case, at least 50 years. Option three is an enforceable contract. Contracts show that the applicant, through a specific performance clause, can enforce the future conveyance of the site. Instead of picking one of the available 3 options, University Station created option number 4, none of the above. They claimed to lease a site which was already leased to somebody else. And they failed to include a copy of that pre-existing lease in their application. The RFA required that the applicant include all relevant contracts, agreements, or leases to establish site control, and University Station failed to meet that requirement. Without a copy of the pre-existing lease, Florida Housing had no way to verify when and if it might terminate. If that weren't enough, University Station's document was drafted to look like a lease and titled as a lease. But upon cursory review, it was not a lease. It had not conveyed the site to the applicant. It revealed the property was already leased to someone else at undisclosed terms, and it left Florida Housing unable to verify whether the applicant could ever get a leasehold interest in the site. While calling it a ground lease, their document was at best an unenforceable contract to potentially lease that site if the pre-existing lease terminated. Their contract lacked the specific performance clause, which makes contracts enforceable, which means that University Station cannot compel the landlord on that site to terminate the pre-existing lease as required to convey it. In summary, the site is not under the applicant's control. It is already leased to someone else on undisclosed terms. The applicant had no present lease, no deed, and no enforceable contract, and the applicant omitted relevant documents required under the RFA. Florida Housing needs to know that developers can actually develop their sites. The board wants to know that developers have the ability to proceed without endless extension requests in front of the board. I appreciate that Florida Housing staff has a limited number of items that they typically review through their current practices with the current RFA language, but I hope that staff would agree that the current practices aren't enough to fully evaluate cases like this one. I imagine that staff may have felt like they didn't have a lot of great options in evaluating this case. But the board does have options. The board can overturn the administrative law judge's conclusions of law and find University Station ineligible based on the exceptions we filed. In the alternative, the board has a way to support both applicants. If University Station is funded, then our development, Vista at Coconut Palm, is the only remaining eligible unfunded self-source application. The board could take leftover funds from this and other RFAs or some of the $40 million of program income that the board is about to add to the next round of RFAs in another agenda item to fund this last self-source development. Our development has an enforceable contract and happened to have been permit ready the day we submitted our application. If awarded, we can break ground this year, which would result in a much quicker delivery of affordable housing than waiting for the next cycle. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hi, I am not Marissa Button. My name is Chris McGuire. I'm one of the Florida housing attorneys who litigated this case. We filed, along with Vistas, we filed our University Station, we filed a response to the exceptions, which is in your package. So I'm not going to go on at great length. I will just say that there are specific requirements in the RFA for what has to be included in a lease. The ALJ found, and in fact the parties conceded, that the University Station, there were 2 leases actually, 1 and 2, that both of those leases met the requirements that were in the RFA. They had to have an unexpired term of 50 years. The lessee had to be the applicant or assign the rights to the applicant, and the owner of the property had to be a party to the lease. In this case, the City of Hollywood was the owner of the property, and they signed the lease with University Station to let them use this property at a particular time in the near future. One of the leases did mention that there was another lease on the property from Barry University. It also included provisions that said that that lease expired in 2021, and the City of Hollywood agreed in the ground lease agreement with University Station that they would grant maybe a 1-year extension of that lease, but no more, and agreed that the property would be available to University Station in June of 2023 for one of the leases. The other one was a little earlier than that. So there was much discussion about what was in the Barry University lease. Did it somehow influence or contradict what the University Station lease with the City of Hollywood had in it? The administrative law judge considered all the testimony and said, no, it didn't. There was a provision in the Barry University lease that said that the parties by mutual consent could extend that lease for another 10 years. ALJ found that the University Station and City of Hollywood lease prevented that from happening. Essentially, the city agreed to extend it for no more than 1 year. So there was a date certain when University Station would be able to take possession of the property. There's no requirement in the RFA that the lease must commence as of application deadline. There's no requirement in the RFA that the lease have any particular commencement date. The specific performance question, there is a requirement for purchase and sale contracts to have a specific performance requirement. There's no such requirement for leases. So, and in this case, Florida Housing testified and the ALJ concurred that the lease was in fact, valid is not right. We don't evaluate the validity of leases, but that the lease that was included met all of the requirements in the RFA, and therefore that the petition should be dismissed. And we think that that is the correct interpretation. Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah, I have one. So there is site control for that lease, but not necessarily, so Barry's going to be there for at least 1 more year, and then there could be an option for them to be there more, or they're there for 1 year?
Barry currently has a lease through 2020, November, I think, of 2021. And there's a provision that it can be extended for 1 more year. Well, there's a provision in the University Station lease with the City of Hollywood where the city says we may extend it for up to 1 more year. So the Barry University, according to that lease that was included in the application, the Barry University lease will be terminated by November of 2022.
And how does that impact the project and placed in service and all that if you're delaying everything by a year?
Well, there are 2 leases. The first lease calls for them to, the commencement date is a year earlier than that. I believe that this is being built in phases, but there was no evidence that having a commencement date starting in at least at the very latest in June of 2023 was going to impact the project the way it was described in the application.
Yes, this, Maureen Dalton is probably counsel for University, yeah.
Thank you. 5 minutes.
Good morning. Maureen Dalton, representing University Station 1 LLC. If I can just begin where Mr. McGuire left off and answer the question that you just asked. There were 2 leases for University Station 1 and the City of Hollywood, and University Station 2 and the City of Hollywood. Mr. McGuire is correct that in fact the development is in 2 phases. So University Station 1, that part of the development begins first, and then University Station commences after that. In the University Station 2 lease, and this is in paragraph 37 of the recommended order, it's addressed in that paragraph, the language within that section defines the commencement date as the latter of the closing of the tenant's construction loan for the development or the termination of the lease to Barry University, but in no event beyond June 30th of 2023. So basically what that's saying is the commencement of University Station 2 is going to begin by June 30th, 2023. In the next paragraph, the lease goes on to explain, so there's no hiding the ball here. The lease goes on to explain that the city leased those premises for educational facility and a parking lot to Barry University to use through November 23rd, 2021. and that the landlord, again, the City of Hollywood, may extend or may enter into one-year extension of that lease at the City of Hollywood's exclusive and sole discretion. So even if the City of Hollywood decided to do that, it would be extended through November 23rd, 2022. But there was no evidence in the record that it had been extended. So there's no overlap there, and there's no impact negatively to the beginning of the construction of University Station 2. And I'm here to answer any other questions.
Okay, I have a question. The option was the city's option.
Yes.
It didn't go two ways.
Within the University Station 2 lease, the option is solely the city's.
Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question for staff regarding the petitioner's comment that there were sufficient funds to approve both applications. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, may I be recognized, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes, Marissa Button, Director of Multifamily Programs. There is not additional funding remaining in this sale 2020-205 RFA to fund an additional application. There is the characterization of the challenger about there being money that we could pull from the next go around, what we have later in the agenda for program income to be added to next year's RFA. There is funding that we're recommending to you to put in terms of program income into the next round of RFAs. I would not recommend that the board take that approach, and just to further add, the challenger also mentioned that staff may have felt constrained in this case as to what to do, but we were not constrained. We followed the terms of the RFA, and in following the terms of the RFA, that includes the ranking and scoring. And this application may have been the next highest eligible self-sourced application, but there were other higher ranked applications in between. And so to deviate from that and add funding, sort of future funding to lift them up and fund both deals as well, we wouldn't recommend to do that because it really violates sort of the integrity of the competitive process in the funding and selection that's in the terms of the RFA. Thank you.
Oh, well, I concur with her sentiment exactly. I don't think we can knee-jerk, although I actually would compliment the challenger on his moxie and asking for the order in that instance. That's pretty good. So, but I think that staff needs to make such recommendations after review, and so I would concur wholeheartedly with what you're stating, Ms. Button.
Okay. Anything else from the board?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, well, sorry, did you also confirm that it was an eligible application?
It was an eligible application, yes.
Okay. Yeah, it was just mentioned earlier that obviously costs are going up significantly. And so in the next round, we'll probably, as was mentioned earlier by the chair, probably be funding less projects or less units by virtue of that cost. So if there were monies around available to fund an additional application, we might not have, it might cost more to fund that same application in the next go around. The only point I was trying to get at when asking the question.
Okay, anything further? Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and vote. I have a motion and a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Staff
Aye.
recommendation.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
All opposed? Any opposed?
Oh,
Okay.
everybody said.
Yeah, everybody said aye.
I
Thank
was
you.
actually watching.
Yeah, you.
Okay, Hugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the legal agenda involves Rule 67-49. That is one of our Florida housing rules that governs procurement of goods and services. It is an internal rule that doesn't really affect our program functions. Under our statute, the corporation may enact rules to exempt itself from some of the laws governing state procurement of goods and services. In April, the board authorized staff to proceed with rulemaking and a notice of proposed rule development, which we filed in May, to update our procurement rule. The purposes of this update are to update statutory references and definitions to get us in sync with statutory changes that happened during the legislative session. Those are just technical changes. Also, some substantial changes involving providing for our own procedure for obtaining certain services, including payroll and the leasing of workspace as we need it. We received no comments on this rule. Staff requests the board authorize us to proceed with filing the notice of proposed rule with JAPSI.
Okay, can I have a motion to staff recommendation?
So moved, since you're looking at.
I knew you would.
Second.
Second.
Motion is second. Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye? Okay, that's unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Marissa?
Good morning again. So the multifamily programs portion of the agenda, we are excited. We have some review committee recommendations for you today. The first one is item A, RFA 2021-105. This is financing to build smaller permanent supportive housing properties for persons with developmental disabilities. We issued this RFA on March 9th, 2021, offering $6.9 million in grant funding to finance small permanent supportive housing developments for persons with developmental disabilities. The deadline for applications was April 21st. We received 7 applications in response to this RFA. The review committee members reviewed and evaluated and scored their assigned portions of the submitted applications. And at the June 2nd, 2021 review committee meeting, the individual committee members presented their scores, and the committee carried out the funding selection process that's set forth in the RFA. The individual scores are on the RFA webpage, and you have a link to that in your materials. The 2021-105 all applications chart that you have in Exhibit A lists the eligible and ineligible applications, and the eligible applications that met the criteria to be considered for funding and are listed in their assigned application number order. The review committee considered a motion to approve the scoring results set out in your materials in Exhibit A, and also recommendations for funding that you have in your materials set out on Exhibit B. And also a motion to recommend that the board approve those scoring results in Exhibit A and the recommendations in Exhibit B, and those motions passed unanimously. Our recommendation is to approve to you today is to approve the review committee's recommendations that you adopt the scoring results of the 7 applications and authorize the tentative selection of the 5 applications set out on Exhibit A for funding. If no notice of protest or formal written protest is filed, staff will proceed to issue a corporation letter of preliminary award to those applications. If there is a notice of protest, we will come back to you after the conclusion of any and all litigation with a recommendation at that time. There is an unallocated balance of just over $4.6 million of grant funding remaining, and any remaining funding will be distributed as approved by the board. And just as a note, we don't have a recommendation for that at this point in time. There was not legislative proviso for that grant funding this year, so we'll probably be coming back in the future talking about an additional RFA to issue, and we'll be talking with policy about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a motion to staff recommendation.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Marissa, any timing on the money that's left over?
We'll talk about that through the next, as we work towards the next funding timeline, so I don't have a specific recommendation to you today.
Okay.
But because we've done this type of RFA previously, we can proceed with a turnaround, decent turnaround time.
Okay, motion and a second. No further discussion? We'll go ahead and vote on staff recommendation.
Are you going to call the vote?
Oh, I'm calling the vote.
Okay. Aye.
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 Those in favor?
Aye. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Marissa, item B.
Thank you. Item B is RFA 2021-108, financing to develop housing for persons with developmental disabilities. This was a very quick turnaround. You may recall this from the last meeting that we had where you provided authority for us to issue this RFA. On May 20th, 2021, Florida Housing issued RFA 2021-108, offering $183,000 in competitive housing credits and $4.6 million in grant funding for nonprofit applicants proposing the development of independent permanent supportive housing for persons with developmental disabilities. The deadline for applications was June 3rd. We received one application in response to this RFA. The review committee members independently evaluated and scored their assigned portions of the submitted application. And at the June 9th, 2021 review committee meeting, the individual committee members presented their scores and carried out the funding recommendations in accordance with the RFA. And you have a link to the scores there in your materials. The 2021 all applications chart is in Exhibit C, and that lists the information about the application. The review committee considered a motion to approve the scoring results in Exhibit C and the recommendation for funding in Exhibit D, and a motion as well to recommend that you, the board, approve the scoring results set out in Exhibit C and recommendation for funding in Exhibit D. And those motions passed unanimously. So our recommendation is that you approve the committee's recommendation that the board adopt the scoring results of the application and authorize the tentative selection of the application set out in Exhibit D for funding. And if that proceeds forward with no notice of intent to protest, which we do not anticipate considering it is one application, we will go ahead and issue that invitation to enter credit underwriting. Thank you.
Okay. Can I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
That was quick.
Yes.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Okay. Item C.
Item C, okay. This is sale and housing credit financing for the construction of workforce housing, RFA 2021-108. On March 15th, we issued this RFA offering just under $3 million in competitive housing credits and just over $18.5 million in sale funding for the construction of workforce housing in Broward, Dade, and Monroe counties. The deadline for applications was April 22nd, 2021. We received 10 applications in response to this RFA. The review committee members independently reviewed their assigned portions of and scored their assigned portions of the submitted applications and convened at a review committee on June 2nd, where they presented their scores and carried out the funding recommendations that are in the RFA. You have in your materials an exhibit, the all applications chart in Exhibit E that lists the eligible and ineligible applications in their assigned application number order. And the review committee considered the motion to approve the scoring results that you have in your materials in Exhibit E and the recommendations for funding that you have in your materials set out in Exhibit F, and as well as a motion to recommend that you, the board, approve the scoring results in Exhibit E and the recommendations for funding in Exhibit F. And those motions passed unanimously. So the recommendation today is that you approve the review committee's recommendations, adopt the scoring results of the 10 applications, and authorize the tentative selection of the 4 applications set out in Exhibit F for funding. And again, if there's no notice of protest or formal protest filed, we'll proceed with invitations to enter credit underwriting. If there is a notice of intent to protest or formal protest, we'll come to you back after the conclusion of any litigation associated with that. Thank you.
Okay. Motion on staff recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none? Item D.
Okay, this is exciting future items. So we had some good review committee items, and now we come to you with this item, the 2021-2022 tentative funding amounts and timeline for RFAs for multifamily developments. During the remainder of 2021 and the first half of 2022, we expect to offer funding through various RFAs as set forth in the tentative funding amounts and timeline plan. So in your materials with your write-up, you see there's a link to the proposed timeline. And this will look familiar to you because we've provided in the information item for the last board meeting as well. We just now have the dollar amounts we can associate with the plan that we're going forward with. So we have an estimated $102.5 million in sale program funding, and that's comprised of just over $62 million from the 2021 legislative appropriation and adding in just over $40 million in sale program income. And we split that, as you recall, with regard to statutory requirements in certain demographic and geographic categories. And that's in accordance with the 2019 rental market study that's performed by the Schimberg Center. So we'll be looking forward to a new market study soon, but we're going through the splits by the market study. The demographics you have in your materials set forth, and that is through that statutory, the statutory requirements, but you'll see the 5% for farm worker, commercial fishing worker, 10% for homeless households, 13% for persons with special needs, and then the split of 25% elderly, and you see that 10% set aside for the EHCL program, that's a statutory set aside, and the 47% for families. And then with regard to geographic splits, we have the 10% for small counties, 36% for medium counties, and 54% for large counties. We will be contemplating an estimated dollar amount that will add to some of these RFAs from the National Housing Trust Fund, and we work with our the federal program staff to hone in on what those dollar amounts will be, but those are always allocated after applications come through the competitive funding in some ways, but we wanted to acknowledge that's a piece of what goes forward in the timeline. And then we have the estimated $55 million in housing credit allocation. And so I'll ask you to think back to the QAP for a moment that you approved back in March, because in the QAP, you approved the set-asides for the pots of the overall housing credit allocation. And in the QAP, you have a designated, it's open, but it's designated 5% board priority of the overall housing credit allocation. The other thing I'm going to ask you to remember is something that changed through the QAP this year was the removal of the 15% set aside for preservation developments. And we put that preservation into the overall allocation authority of how we think generally. So we have that 5% set aside for board priority. We removed the 15% set aside, and the discussion at that time was that certainly wouldn't prevent us from having another preservation RFA going forward. We received significant stakeholder feedback about this, and we are committed to still having a goal. We recommend we have a goal to still fund preservation type developments, but certainly we're not going to ask you to use a 15% threshold again. So the other thing that has come up that's worth noting as we talk about this and why we're making the recommendation overall is because we're coming off of the last year of the 12.5% increase that we had over 3 years for housing credits. So overall, there's going to be less housing credits because that increase will expire. So what we wanted to do was basically have that high priority as defined by the board split and do a portion of that to go towards the Monroe Workforce RFA, which we've done in years past. We need some 9% credits, and we analyzed, okay, the amount that would be applicable for that would be about $1.5 million, and then the rest of that 5% just add into the overall allocation authority because we're going to have less credits overall, pending any other federal legislation that may come up between now and then, of which we would discuss with you if that were to happen. So then we have the 5% in the QAP for persons with a disabling condition. We also set aside the the geographic splits for the amount of credits. So that's 3.1% for small counties, 36.2% for medium counties. And this is where you'll see what I noted about preservation. We're going to include a recommendation for one preservation award, and as we have always historically done, at least one homeless award, and 60.7% for large counties, and we'll include one preservation award there, as well as what we've historically done is a homeless demographic award. So I talked a lot, but what you see in all of that that's laid out is what you have in the exhibit is the timeline with the associated dollar amounts that go with that. So the tentative funding amounts timeline plan that outlines the various RFAs, we're recommending for you to approve that information. It reflects in there, we'll hold workshops and issue those RFAs in conjunction with the timeline through the remainder of 2021 and into the first half of 2022. And We added some additional information for your background about how we got to those calculations in Exhibits H and I. And the one thing I'll mention, because it's come up a little bit, I mean, I believe we have had we've workshopped quite a bit up until this point. I think generally the public is very aware, our stakeholder community, from local governments to developers, nonprofit and for-profit, with the expectation of what we're going out with. We think there's still going to be a healthy appetite for the competitive funding that we're administering. And we'll talk more about, as we workshop, any nuances that may need to be adjusted with regard to current market conditions as well, too. So we're very sensitive to that, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that in an update later in the agenda. So our recommendation is that you, the board, authorize staff to proceed with the development of the various RFAs and authorize our executive director to establish review committees for each RFA and to make recommendations to the board. Thank you.
Okay, do I have a motion for the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Discussion.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just on the geographic percentages, can you just explain how those were calculated?
Yes, those are calculated through the statewide rental market study through an analysis of cost-burdened households and affordable available units. So we pull that from the Schimberg numbers that they give us.
Okay, so the 10, the 36, and the 54 were
Yes,
directly
for
from that.
sale, the 10, I can actually explain there's a differentiation too, because what you see in sale is that the geographic is 10% for small counties.
Right.
And in housing credits, it's 3.1%.
Exactly, that's where I was going.
So the 10% is the statutory requirement of the sale program, that whatever the amount is, if it's less than 10, we will at least set aside 10%.
Minimum of 10.
And that's by
Okay.
statute.
So
Yep.
the actual is 3.1% if there wasn't that minimum.
That's right.
Explains a lot.
Anything further? Okay. Seeing none, let's go ahead and vote. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members, and thank you, Marissa, for that recommendation. And I know that multifamili's worked hard on
Thought she was
that.
going to read that whole book.
Look forward to it. She had quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead and move on. Laura,
Good morning, Mr.
professional
Chair.
services selection.
Good morning, board members. Today we have a request to begin the competitive solicitation process to obtain a pool of management companies. To expedite the process of any necessary foreclosures, Florida Housing retains a pool of management companies to handle the daily operations of a property once we take title. And we currently have management company contracts with WRH Realty and Royal American. They both will expire within the next 9 months, and there are no remaining renewal options. So since we have a continuing need for these services, we recommend that you authorize staff to begin the competitive solicitation process to select a pool of management companies. Thank you.
Okay, I have a.
So moved,
motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Second.
You're quick. Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Bill, you're next.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. This item is competitive solicitation for technical assistance provider services. Florida Housing contracts with experienced third-party providers to provide technical assistance services, primarily for Florida Housing's pre-development loan program, as well as we use it in some instances during when we issue or implement demonstrations. The users of the technical assistance services tend to be nonprofits, community organizations, public housing authorities, again, to kind of work, help them build their capacity and help them with technical assistance as they move through the pre-development and development processes, as well as being able to work to acquire our permanent financing resources after the PLP program. The technical assistance is provided at no cost. And we utilize the technical assistance providers to also help us verify that the user of the technical assistance services, as well as applicants of the pre-development loan program and demonstrations, have conducted feasibility and their due diligence to kind of work toward acquiring the pre-development loan and other resources. The current contracts for these services with three providers, the corporate organizational Innovations and Solutions Incorporated, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, and the Florida Housing Coalition. These contracts with them as technical assistance providers is set to expire in January of 2022, and there are no renewal options remaining under this contract. So staff recommend that the board authorize staff to begin the competitive solicitation process to select another pool of qualified firms to provide these technical assistance services as we see a need for those going forward.
Okay, can I have a motion to the recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Have a
You know,
motion, a second?
I think you need to stop looking towards me every time. I'm starting to get complex here.
I have a motion and a second. All in
Yeah.
favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? Okay, let's move on to item C.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since
That's Angie.
2014, this is for the Independent Registered Municipal Advisor item. So since 2014, Florida Housing has retained an Independent Registered Municipal Advisor, or IRMA, so that we may receive information and recommendations from our underwriting team. At the May 2018 board meeting, the board authorized staff to contract with Kane Mitter and Associates Incorporated for these services. The contract was for 3 years and expires October 2nd, 2021. It can be renewed for one additional 3-year period. And staff supports extending this contract for the additional 3-year term. So staff recommends that the board direct staff to proceed with the 3-year renewal option.
Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Yes, go ahead.
In these renewals, I assume that the agreements that you have in place address the cost if it's renewed?
I don't know for sure on this one, but I believe they typically do, yes.
And is it safe to assume the costs stay the same? Yes. There's several others on here, too.
Right. I would have to read the specific contract to know if it's not exactly the same, it's just a small increase.
Okay, so it's not anything significant if there's a provision in it.
And staff would try to renegotiate it if we felt like it
And
was
y'all have got
exorbitant or
some
wouldn't
really
have
good
signed on it.
negotiators, so I'm sure that that would be the case. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? Okay, let's move on.
So this next item is for the printing and electronic distribution for official statements. We use an outside firm to provide services for printing, binding, shipping, and electronic transmission of our preliminary and final official statements for bond issues. At the May 2018 board meeting, the board authorized staff to contract with ImageMaster LLC for these services. Again, the contract was for 3 years, and this one is set to expire on August 19th. It may be renewed for an additional 3-year period subject to satisfactory performance. Staff supports extending this contract for the additional 3-year term. So staff recommends that the board direct staff to proceed with the 3-year renewal option.
Okay, motion on the recommendation?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? Okay, next.
Mr. Hearn.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is David Hearn. I'm the Florida Housing Chief Information Officer. And item E is a single source procurement for on-base licensing. Florida Housing utilizes a software system called OnBase as its document and records management system. Highland Software is the developer of OnBase. At the January 23rd, 2020 board meeting, the board approved an upgrade to an enterprise license with increased functionality and greater capability to integrate with our multifamily portfolio management system, ProLink. OnBase is proprietary software, and Highland Software Incorporated is the only entity able to provide licensure. Staff believes and recommends it is in the best interest of Florida Housing to continue with these services and proceed with an updated one-year contract.
Okay. Do I have a
So
motion?
moved.
Have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Seeing none? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next is, who's doing single house?
Yeah, multifamily development finance status update. Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you, I've heard from a number of board members in regards to this item, and we're going to let Marissa Button lead the discussion on this in regards to financing and some of the issues that we're seeing, which were part of your package today.
Thank you, Trey.
With the help of Kevin.
Yeah,
Yes.
And Kevin.
Okay.
Yes.
And thank you very much, and thank you, board. Before I jump. Yes, I can. There, hopefully that's better. Before I jump in to this item with Kevin about the current status of what's going on in the market and increasing construction prices, I did just want to mention one thing in terms of a multifamily update overall. We had a huge, as you know, going through it, board package overall. And I get to be the one that comes up and presents everything to you and talk with you, but this is the work of a tremendous staff that we have. And a lot of them are over here today that are in multifamily. They don't want to raise their hands, sitting over here. But particularly two important leaders in the department, Melissa Levy, who's the Assistant Director of the Housing Credit Program. Melissa, you have to raise your hand and wave. And Tim Kennedy, who's the Assistant Director over loans, bonds, and our grant programs. I know he's somewhere. These are two very important, everyone's important in our department, but they really are excellent leaders, and you don't get to see them enough, so I wanted to shout out to them. So thank you, guys. But really, with regard to what's going on now and current events, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background to sort of situate where, as staff, we think we're at, and the board as where you see things leading up to our retreat that's happening in July. At our last meeting, some of you brought up concerns regarding the impact of increasing construction costs and overall market volatility on what's going on in our development pipeline, particularly in how things may proceed going forward in the future. And we wanted to use this opportunity to provide an update to you as to the research we've been doing and some of the due diligence that we're looking at, and with the goal of giving significant time to this very issue at the board retreat. And so in some of the prior meetings we've had towards the end of 2020 and even the beginning of 2021, there has been an expressed concern about notwithstanding construction cost increases, but overall some of the delays in delivery of developments in conjunction with our program requirements. And we've heard that loud and clear. And as we were thinking about the retreat and offering topics to discuss, one of those was, development challenges in multifamily delivery and performance incentives. And that was sort of the vein of which we started thinking about the retreat. And now, over the past few months, sort of these situations have really come to a forefront very specifically about construction cost increases. Of course, there's an interplay with delays and some component of that. But we really think this is something why we need to focus on it on the retreat a bit, and to get an understanding of what some of our recommendations may be and what your policy objectives are with regard to some of this stuff too. So over the past few months, developers have approached Florida Housing staff, and probably some of you as well, regarding increases in commodities pricing. Obviously, everybody knows about lumber, but really across the board, everything increasing. Labor costs having significant negative impacts on, as well as labor costs having significant negative impacts on awards in the development pipeline. There has been a downward trend a bit in credit pricing because of the fixed 4% credit. There has been increases in insurance costs, and we anticipate there will be fluctuations with changes to rent limits, and all of this puts, when we say volatility, we're thinking collectively about all of these things. And developers have indicated to us, due to these volatile circumstances, awards in the pipeline are experiencing funding gaps, that they have concerns about remaining to be feasible, that they're in danger and or are exceeding our total development cost limitations that we put in place, which Kevin is going to talk about more significantly. But that, of course, is a cost control mechanism we've had in place for a number of years. And difficulty in obtaining reasonable general contractor terms because everyone's experiencing the volatility, and we have certain program requirements that we expect applicants to come in and meet. And with regard to GC contracts, that's becoming an issue as well. And so, we have heard examples of, schedules of values increasing in excess of 20 to 30%, significant increases in, per unit costs increasing over average. And we know unequivocally these are nationwide problems in the industry, and we feel like we're going to need to do something about it. So some of the due diligence we've done up into this time frame is, we have been consulting with and listening to the developers that we're currently working with, both large and small, serving various locations throughout the state. We've communicated with general contractors that are in our affordable housing programs. They're a little bit different because they know what our program requirements are, so that's a different perspective. We've discussed with, the private sector and syndicators as to, how they're approaching issues. We've met with the Coalition of Affordable Housing Providers, CAP. They have an underwriting subcommittee that we've consulted with, so sort of as an affinity group collectively, wanted to hear from them as well. We've consulted with our credit underwriters, who are one of our most valuable assets, and they're here too. And so, so we've been consulting with them. And we've also been looking at what other state HFAs are doing, because they're meeting the moment in their own ways as well. And we're looking forward to next week. We have NCSHA convention. We'll be talking with some of our sister HFAs as well. But we're aware of what other states are doing. And most recently, what Kevin will talk to you about more is we put out a survey to actually collect data for developments in our pipeline that have not yet had a notice of commencement, to get a gauge of what they're looking at and what they're seeing in terms of how costs have increased for them. And at the surface level, some of just the preliminary things that we want to note is that we know there are some developments that were languishing in the pipeline before current market circumstances arose. And this was some of the concerns that the board had over time. However, there are also some developments who this is because of the timing of when they applied for funding and certain assumptions that they made are caught in a situation here where they're dealing with these extreme shortfalls. And we also know that there are some developments that have been able to shift and get through. I mean, you've had, this agenda alone had 11 credit underwriting reports approved, and these developments are getting firm loan commitments and proceeding to closing ideally. So we've heard all across, and what that means is there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but we've come to sort of at a high level, we think there's 3 big topics we'll want to discuss with you in July. One of those is what the flexibility we can have in certain rule considerations that we have in place. And that can be anything from how we look at GC contracts and the requirements of those to timing in some senses, because sometimes time is going to be folks' friend depending on where they are in the trajectory, and some of that may not be the case. So we'll want to talk about some of those issues, and we've got good feedback from our stakeholders about their opinions on that, and we'll work with our underwriters talking about that. The adjustment of total development cost per unit limitations is another bucket that we'll be significantly looking at, and Kevin will talk about that more. And then there certainly is an overall question about funding. Is there funding to do anything? Some of you have been on the board when we did our viability loan program back in, I think, 2017. We created a viability loan program to meet shortfalls related to credit pricing at the time, and that affected arguably across the board all developments. That was just something that was happening in the market that affected everybody in terms of pricing. We've learned a lot from that program. Some of those loans have closed. Some folks have returned that funding over the course of the 3 or so years. Some folks have needed the funding. So we've learned a lot from that to be able to look at if we have source to do that, which is really a separate conversation we're not going to have today, but if there is an identified source, what kind of consequences we would put to that source if folks need extra funding, because again, it's a really sort of a complicated issue in terms of when folks have come in and what they can expect. So those are the 3 kind of buckets: what we're doing with our rules, if there's a source, what your policy objective is for us to administer some type of source, and then of course addressing the TDC issue. And they each have, policy and nuances that we'll be looking for information and detail from you. And so with regard to the retreat format, we'll be focusing on that. We also will want to hear from you between now and then if there's something that you'd like us to address in that context of conversation. We anticipate having industry folks for you to hear, because you've heard us talk, you will hear us talk, you have heard us talk, you want to hear from folks in the industry as well. And we will be also doing at the retreat a introduction officially to our underwriting firms, so you can talk with them, hear about what they, overall what they do for us, but then if you have questions for them as well, they'll be available too. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to talk to you a little bit more about the survey tool that we put together, the responses to that generally, and TDC.
All right, thanks, Marissa, and thanks, Mr. Chair and Board. Good morning. And for the record, it's Kevin Tatro, Director of Development Finance. I'm not Hugh Brown.
You might need to speak up just a little bit, Kevin.
A little louder, or a little closer. All right, so the survey we had, it started off with, and we look at the deals we've awarded in the last 3.5 years, there have been 240 developments we've given awards to. And out of those, 145 have not yet started construction. Now, most of those are more recent awards, but there are some that are a little bit older than very recent. So we've contacted the stakeholders about, what's going on. We've asked them on a voluntary basis to provide us some information about where they stand in their current sources and uses, so that we can get an idea on a quantitative level as to what the numbers are showing us as to the delays, or if it's a process thing. And out of the 145 developments that have not started construction, we received 52 responses during the first go-around. Now, since then, we have actually reached out to each of the rest of the remaining ones to ask them to continue to process the request and to give us a response by the end of the day today, so we have a bigger picture of what's going on. I'm going to mention a few things of the 52 responses that we've received to date. I have to assume that at this point that they're probably the most critical ones that are out there. And looking through those, you can see that not everybody needs to get funding. They are finding ways to make things happen, one way or another, either, cost control, re-engineering, higher deferred fees, going to local governments, but they're making things happen on their own, and they're progressing. And some of them look like they're on their way to doing it, and given enough time, they can progress. We did see that the average time between invitation to credit underwriting and the filing of notice of commencement is anywhere from 12 to 18 months, usually around 15 months. So that's a good indicator how long it takes on general to get ahead. But of the ones that did indicate that there's a funding shortfall, the average is about $18,000 a unit. In addition to that, the same pool of applicants, we examined the issues they're having or not having with the TDC per unit limitation process, which is our RFA process where we control the cost of the projects, so they're not excessively expensive, they're reasonable, there's a cap in place. If you go above that limit, there is a process in place where we start cutting back the maximum developer fee to try and bring the cost in line with what we expect. And of course, if you get to be above a certain limit, the process is that we go to the board and recommend a denial of moving ahead and take the funds away. And looking at those, about 4 in 10 developments would either not pass the test at all, would pass the test with a mandated reduction in the developer fee, or just marginally pass with no room for further variance. Now, we'll continue to look at this with the new responses coming in, but it does appear that in likelihood that we will be back in July with a recommendation to at least do some kind of a modification to the TDC limitation process to allow these developments that can move ahead, but for the TDC tests themselves, because we believe that the TDC issues are not the result of developer problems. It is the marketplace.
So we're going to have a more significant discussion on these items at the retreat?
Yes, it could, TDC increases in the next year, RFA cycle will be significantly higher than the past year, and we may need to, and of course, this is a correction to the past RFA cycles.
So that, sorry, go ahead. That sort of
Problem.
concluded our,
Yeah.
update.
I'll just voice, because this is like a current issue that I'm going through right now on a project. So I think it's important just to note that there should be a deep dive into the general contractors associated with these projects. I have a current project right now where the GC filed bankruptcy as a result of this market. And obviously, it's a larger GC that had projects all over the nation, but still, GCs can, enter some serious issues in honoring contracts, et cetera, with regard to that. And I think also, one of the things with regard to this particular project is that they have sufficient bonding on the GC. So there's a sufficient bond. So obviously, any cost increases that are going to occur as a result of that GC going BK are going to be covered by the surety. So, just, something to note. And for the underwriters, deep dives into the GC.
Hey, Bill?
I wish you were going to be here for that discussion, because your experience and knowledge would be invaluable, because this is going to be a really sticky topic. You made the statement, one size doesn't fit all, and yet the demand would be that we try and cover it with one size to address it. And how do you make differentiation between a developer and a general contractor that are very efficient? You brought up the point that some are just going through it as if it's not, and making adjustments and being successful with those adjustments, versus maybe a not so efficient developer and GC. So do you reward them for their inefficiencies?
May I respond briefly?
No, I mean,
That is right. So it's like rhetorical, but that is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to make a recommendation to use source, and you've got developers who've been awarded in the same RFA, and one has value engineered, reduced their fee,
Right.
been able to get across the finish line and do that, and another, and again, not, for whatever reason, that we think we need to have a discussion about what the consequences are if there is going to be source.
I'll
to
be
that.
so anxious to view your recommendations for that.
And we take your right? Like,
If you have some ideas, we can add them to ours. too.
yeah, I mean, and I would be frankly, other states, when they're looking at their processes, some are saying it's taking a, is it taking a cutoff of what, prospective competitive funding can be allocated, and frankly, that's a reasonable discussion, we think. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Did you have something?
No.
Oh, I thought,
No.
okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I would say, as she alluded to, shortly after I became executive director and you were appointed to the board in 2017, we had the viability loan program. I think we've learned a lot from that, and we'll use that. We'll of course share that. I think most of the other board members are new since then, and so we'll take a look at that as well, and of course take your suggestions and ideas, which we're open to, of course.
That should be very interesting, for sure. Okay, anything further? Okay,
Great. I think we're on to the second public comment. I did want to make a recognition of State Representative Allison Tant, who is our representative here in Tallahassee for many of us, if she wanted to make any statements, or I know she gets congratulations for all her hard work comes to fruition today. She had an item on the consent agenda.
So I am one of the folks that's involved with Independence Landing. I have a son with developmental disabilities, and I have had the great privilege and pleasure of working with the staff here at Florida Housing Finance Corporation. I'm so grateful for this innovative approach to finding a solution that there has not been one for people like my son across Florida. You have stepped in and done something remarkable here to help people who have had no way to find a peaceful solution for their loved ones. And I just am very grateful for that. I've also enjoyed working closely with all of the staff throughout the legislative session. It's probably because of my work with Independence Landing that I actually decided to run for the legislature, just seeing some needs there that are just not met. And it was a great treat for me to be able to be an advocate for Florida housing every single day of that session. And I will stay an advocate. And I just appreciate your work. I'm grateful for your placing us on the consent agenda and approving us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, and congratulations, and thank you for your help this session.
Yeah, thank you. Now we're open to public comment. Sean. We've missed your face.
Good morning. Sean Wilson with Blue Sky Communities based in Tampa. On behalf of everybody at Blue Sky and also on behalf of all the members of the Coalition of Affordable Housing Providers, I want to say it's great to be back in the same room with everybody. And we've all been working real hard. You guys have all been working real hard during this time. And it's a pleasure to be getting back to normal, of course. I want to thank staff for diving into the issues that some of the pipeline developments are facing right now. And it sounds like you guys have made great progress, and we really appreciate you taking a look at that, and looking forward to the discussion in July. I want to thank the governor's office for preserving the $40 million that we didn't think was going to be available. Hopefully that will find its way into a Florida housing program soon. And I'm looking forward to working with everybody, and just really happy to be back. And so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Anybody else? I don't see anybody. Oh.
More.
Oh.
Hello, everyone. First of all, my name is
introduce
Brian.
yourself. Yep.
Oh, yeah, my name is Brian Waterfield with Tim Shell Development. First of all, I want to just say really quickly that art contest was amazing. I think all of us can say, especially the parents in the room, that our kids have been tremendously affected by the pandemic, and seeing something like that was very touching. So thank you for that. I wanted to just briefly talk about the viability discussion that we had about struggling developments. We submitted an application back in 2019 for a development called Tranquility at Milton. Obviously, everyone knows that the panhandle of Florida was tremendously affected by hurricanes, and there's a huge need for affordable housing in that area. And we are very committed to bringing affordable housing to the city of Milton. In fact, the city of Milton was gracious enough to contribute $354,000 to our development as a loan, so that as part of the 2019 application, the 2019 RFA for medium and small counties, we could go after the local government area of opportunity goal that was part of that RFA. So the city is very much looking forward to the affordable housing that's being brought to the area. There was a recent article that was written in the Pensacola News Journal about the development, so there's a lot of excitement about it. And I just want to stress that there is somewhat of a sense of urgency with all of this. We obviously submitted our application back in 2019, and we had to put the property under contract back then. We're now in 2021. We have a land seller that's asking us, what's going on, and it's starting to become kind of a critical situation. We personally have $750,000 invested into the project so far, and a deal that was very viable back in 2019, because of the rising construction costs, has quickly become not viable. There are other states such as Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, South Carolina, North Carolina that have made decisions about forward allocating tax credits, which we think is a very good idea. I think an average of $150,000 to $200,000 of tax credits could go a long way for a property and could fund a number of struggling developments, where my concern about a viability loan, similar to what has been done in the past, is the amount of time that would go into that through an RFA process, through a workshop. And I think there are developments in the pipeline currently that need help. And, you know, it's as a developer, we're, you know, it's funny to come up here and make this request because it seems like we're, you know, might be requesting something to assist us, but really we're just asking for help from Florida Housing to get the development to the finish line so that we can bring affordable housing to the area. That's our biggest priority. So it's really just whatever you can do to help, and we certainly appreciate all of your consideration to this matter.
And this is going to be a big part of our discussions next month.
Right, exactly. And we really appreciate you all taking the time to talk about all that, and it means a lot to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Board members?
No, one quick thing.
Yes.
To his point, I would hope that there'll be a number of developers there to give input. I know Marissa talked to us about our input maybe, but we need theirs too. So,
We will make
do.
sure that we've been communicating with CAP and folks that are not in CAP, and even looking at developers, talking with developers in the supportive housing coalition as well, so you get a broad perspective.
good.
In July.
Yeah, I
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
might just, oh, sorry, Reese. still
Yeah,
going?
go ahead.
I just might also add, we might want to think about future policy as well as immediate, what's in the pipeline and what's urgent, because we obviously just came out of a unique situation, and we're also seeing significant inflation right now. So the faster we can act, the better for everyone.
Right. Anyone else? Okay, anything further? Right.
The agenda, I appreciate everybody coming. It's been a great meeting, and I'm excited moving forward.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Thank you all.
Oh.
Thank you.